Hi, this is Keith Wooden, and welcome to Story Mosaics. Uh, what a week this has been. I'm recording this on April 7th, 2025. And the reason why I'm talking about it as a week, it has been a rough one around here. I live in the Midwest, and I know this goes all over the world. And I'm so appreciative of those who listen in from different places. And you may have a different climate than what we have, but our climate fluctuates dramatically. Well, in this last week, we have had such a fluctuation. In fact, if you are from Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, Tennessee, and even up the eastern seaboard, you recognize that we have gone through the ringer in terms of weather. And in fact, in Indiana, we went through 13 tornadoes in one evening across the state. And the fact is, these tornadoes were taking place between about 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. Those are tough ones because you can't really very well stay up the whole time. You're forced to be in your basements because the tornado warnings were right in your area. And we saw a tremendous amount of damage very near our own home. And so we were very weather aware in those moments. And so were people all across that region. In fact, we saw record flooding all across that region, and it's still not over for some on this date of recording because they're not yet at the river's peak. And oh boy, did we see that kind of weather there. So boy, in the old parlance of a great song, rainy days and Mondays, they get me down. And that's the case in this situation. And so I have been looking for a reason to smile and just opportunities just to experience something that's a little less dreary. And so when I turn to Story Mosaics, it comes to maybe there's some moments that we can just smile together. I've chosen a few stories from my own life, ripped from those day-to-day experiences, and they follow the characteristics of some stories that really hit home in a humorous way, a way to make us smile. One of our friends was staying with us. His name is Nomel. He comes from the Philippines, and Nomel is used to 90-degree weather. And in fact, if it dips much below 90, they don coats and put on hats to stave themselves from the cold. And so when he came here and our weather was fluctuating, so on one day it was 70 degrees, and then the next day it was 28 degrees. That fluctuation was getting to him physically and emotionally. We walked outside on a 60-degree day, and he said, "Keith, is this the kind of weather it is when it snows?" He'd never seen snow, and so he was actually kind of looking forward to it. Well, I couldn't get him any snow on that day at 60 degrees, but then 28 degrees, yeah, you spit some snow out there. So I hope he got to see that because he left us the day just before it got down that 28 degrees. So I hope he got to see a little bit of snow, Noel, and I hope you're having a great trip down in Texas right now. Hey, I like I said, any reason to smile in this kind of setting, though, and I've shared with you a little bit of my history. I was in ministry for 40 years before I retired, and one part of that ministry was something that oftentimes made me smile. We had to create what was called a bulletin every week. A bulletin was the announcements, and since we didn't have Facebook or any other means by which to get announcements out to people, they depended on that bulletin to be something that they could tape up on their refrigerator, put the magnet there, and see the events that were coming up that week. And so we would go through each week and create new announcements and new information to convey to the congregation. And well, sometimes the announcements got a little colorful. And it was so much fun because they were fun to read. One such announcement was this: it's Easter Sunday, and because it is, Mrs. Lewis will come forward and lay an egg on the altar. I wish I could have seen that one. Oh my goodness. In this day where everybody's buying chickens because eggs are so expensive, laying an egg on the altar might be a adequate sacrifice as well. Maybe we ought to start taking tithes and offerings in eggs. That would work, I guess. Here's another one: that Weight Watchers will meet at 7 p.m. at First Presbyterian Church. Please use the large double doors at the side of the building. As if The meeting was not humiliating enough. Now you're having to enter through the large double doors. Ouch. Okay, two more. I'm going to share with you two more. A bean supper will be held on Tuesday evening in the church. Music will follow. Kind of music will follow? That makes me really, really nervous. Okay, one more of these announcements. The fasting and prayer conference will also include meals. Let that sink in. Yeah, talk about a conundrum. Talk about two conflicting ideas. That's it. Well, being in ministry for 40 years, I not only read those kinds of announcements, I also lived those kinds of instances within the church. And I think these three short stories might bring a smile to your face. And they fit with the theme of what Story Mosaics is all about. Because I'm just like you, I'm just a guy with some stories. And the fact is, we want to help you tell your stories and tell them better. And so when you tune into Story Mosaics, I hope you're listening for some of the formatting that we always talk about when we're creating stories, and how those stories are created so that you can convey a deep truth, a humorous idea, or just sometimes an opportunity to give that speech that you're inclined to have to give. In fact, I had a young man speak to me the other day, and I was so excited because he asked me to help craft his speech for graduation. In fact, he's valedictorian of the class, and that's quite an accomplishment. And he said, I've listened to you so many years, Keith, and I really want you to help me craft a speech for that valedictorian address. I was not only humbled and honored, but I also thought, what a great opportunity for us to work on something just like we work on in Story Mosaics, working on telling our stories better. Well, this first story comes from the life page of my ministry. In every church, there's usually ushers, those people that help people get to their seats. They just conduct some business of the church there, and helping people in the offerings, or also directions, or just being a presence of welcoming. And we were no different. We had a great team of ushers. We had a great team of elders as well, but we had a great team of ushers there, and they always were there early. They made sure the sanctuary was appropriate, and that there were no papers left over in the pews, or no tables that were out of place, or just so that everything was presentable. And it was a high honor to have such great individuals to serve. But on one particular occasion, at the end of the service, I was just kind of making my way out. And a lot of times after a service, I just kind of like to breathe in the atmosphere of what took place there, and just to relive some of the things that happened within people's lives. And actually, oftentimes it was a very moving moment, but sometimes it was just making my way to the door. Well, on this occasion, I saw one of our ushers, and he looked like he had an agenda. And so he was walking straight towards me. And so I just greeted him. Hey, Gene, what's up? And he said, well, I got him. And I thought, oh my goodness, what happened? I hadn't even noticed anything that took place. What happened, Gene? I got him. I got him before he got out of the building. And I must have had this quizzical look on my face, and certainly the intensity that he had pushed me to a different level. Gene, what happened? What happened? Did something go wrong? And he said, yeah, we caught him. We caught a guy that was trying to steal from the church. Immediately, I thought of the offerings and the money that might have been taken there. And sometimes people do, it's been oftentimes, not often, but it's been times where people have taken their change out of the offering plate, put in 100 and take out the 520s, so to speak. And so anyway, I was just kind of wondering, okay, Gene, help me out. What happened? And he said, well, a guy tried to steal a Bible, but we got him before he got too far. We got him before he even left the building. I saw him. I smiled and my heart sank all at the same time. I thought, Gene, that would have been a good thing for him to steal. steal a Bible. But I had to be gentle with Gene because he was so proud of himself and so proud of his heroics. But then I instructed him very gently, hey, Gene, that would have been great if he had gone ahead and taken that. We changed the course of things. We changed our wording from that point on. We told people, and this was a communication to all of our ushers, our attendees, and our visitors. We let people know that if they needed a Bible, there was one right there in front of them in the chairs. And if they wanted to take one of those with them, they could take it with them. They could use it as their own. In fact, during the service, we encouraged them. If they had a pen or a pencil, when they turned to the page we were talking about and preaching on that Sunday, if they wanted to underline something, I wanted them to treat that Bible as their own. And you know what? We never caught another person stealing a Bible, but we did see a lot of them go out of the building. That was a great moment. And when I look back on it and just hearing Gene say, we got him, and we got the guy who was stealing Bibles. When I was first in ministry, though, there were a lot of things I had to get used to. I was a 27-year-old guy straight out of seminary. And frankly, I knew there were some things that I didn't want to practice in the church that I would pastor in the future, but I just didn't know the lay of the land. And I was depending upon some of the senior leaders in the church to give me direction through the maze of church history and the maze of process and all those things that are part of a church's culture. Well, one of the things that I did not want to do is I was not interested in sitting in one of those huge chairs at the front of the congregation. It was way, way, way too much on display, and who knows what I would do up there, something inappropriate, I was sure. And so I was pretty certain I did not want that. So one of the first things I did early on in my ministry, a long time ago, is I took those chairs off the platform and I sat in the chairs that were part of the sanctuary along with the rest of the people. I also wanted to emphasize that we were all one. We were one body, we were one personhood, and there weren't any platform people, so to speak, those people that took a higher position than all the rest of the congregation. But I recognized also that I had a role in the church. Well, here was the deal. One Sunday morning, sitting there, and the music had ended, and I was preparing my notes, putting them back together, and placed them in my Bible, and I walked up to the pulpit and I opened my Bible and I began my sermon with an illustration. I started telling the story, and then one of our leaders in the church sat 2 rows back on the left-hand side, and he started kind of contorting himself there and trying to get my attention and also just very intent on making sure that I was going to get a message from him. And then as soon as I looked over him, he would mouth something. I looked at him and then I looked away because he was distracting me. And I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but there is a rhythm to public speaking. And once you get in a rhythm, once you get started over that little hump, it's very hard to turn that and turn the rhythm off and address something. But every time my eyes would go back across the congregation, there he was. And I'm going, what is going on? And I averted my eyes once again, and I tried to, but I have to admit, I was stumbling now. I was looking down at my notes. I was reading my notes, for heaven's sake. And that's just not like me and my delivery, but anything to keep my eyes off of him. We were about 5 minutes into the message, and I could tell I was getting discombobulated. I don't even know what that word completely means, but I was becoming completely distracted. And there he was again. And so I just stopped and I said, help me out. What is it you are saying? I know it was a bit embarrassing for him, but it was even more embarrassing for me when he responded this: turn on Jesus. And I thought I was preaching Jesus. I thought I was sharing Jesus, but that's not what he meant. There on the platform behind me on my left over my left-hand shoulder was a very famous picture of Jesus, a print of a very famous picture, Solomon's depiction of the face of Jesus. It has graced 1,000 places, maybe 1,000,000 or 10 million places, and it has found its home in many, many, many churches. And ours had its place on the platform, and a little light that the pastor had always walked up and turned the light of Jesus on and then began his message. And I realized that I had broken one of the cardinal rules. I had not turned on Jesus. I hate to tell you this. I didn't do it the next week. I didn't even do it in the first month or two. I went about my role dutifully of going over there and turning on the light that I was underneath Jesus and then preaching my sermon. But then there came a time when I recognized I just couldn't do it anymore. And though I continued to turn the light of Christ on our lives, well, I took the picture of Jesus down, and we didn't have any icons in the church anymore in that respect. I'm not even sure, well, without getting too hung up on this, I can tell you that the depiction in that picture did not resemble what Jesus really would have looked like in that first century as a Middle Eastern Jew. There's one more I just want to share with you very briefly here. And there's a tragedy in the midst of this, but it was going to make me smile. You know, in our society today, funerals have become a very expensive commodity, and not everyone can afford the 8, 10, 12, 15, even $20,000 funerals. And such was the case of this one individual, where the family came to me and said that they wanted me to do the services, but they didn't know how they were going to afford it. In fact, they didn't know how they were going to be able to pay anything towards this. This wasn't even their close relative. It was a distant relative that had passed, and no one was stepping up, and they didn't want him to go without some honor, some service where people could come and at least pay tribute to his life and his legacy. Yeah. I told him that maybe they could talk with a few funeral homes, and maybe they could find out whether there were any ones that provided what are sometimes called paupers funerals. And usually they are just bare bones services. Such was the case. They found a place that would help them out. And I was so touched by this particular funeral home because they not only helped them out, but they made sure that every detail of that service was covered. And it was going to be a closed casket, but just before the service, family was going to be able to come in and view and give last respects. And so I was there with the family. I've failed to, well, actually didn't fail to. I didn't tell you one unique detail. You see, this was a Caucasian guy, and this was an African-American funeral home that by and large they catered to an African-American audience there, and those who were grieving found their needs fulfilled by this group. And so, well, in all of their care, they had done their very best. But when we got there, they paused and the family gathered around the casket there, and they opened the casket very slowly, and we looked inside. And this particular funeral home only had one type of makeup and foundation. It was very much African American foundation and makeup that was on this man's face. And I heard this gasp from a couple of them. And I have to tell you, I know it sounds horrible, but it was one of those moments that was also so humorous. The director closed the lid of the funeral, turned to the family and said, I hope everything is suitable for you. It was suitable. It was suitable. But you know what? I've talked with that family a lot of times and we've laughed about the situation, but we've also honored that place that gave their very, very best in representing his life and legacy in that moment. You know, even in difficult things, we can sometimes find a smile. I don't know about you, but there are stories in my life that now have become a part of a catalog of events. And like my wife's family, who we just had the services for her mom, and whenever my wife's family gets together, they tell stories, lots of stories. I have to tell you, there's very few of those stories that are new to me. They've been told many, 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 many times, but they have a way of still bringing a smile, still bringing joy, touching the very hearts of our lives, and bringing comfort. I hope in the midst of this ugly, ugly weather that we've been having, and where spring is trying to poke its way in through the March gloom, that we find a reason to smile. Hey, can I ask you to do me a favor? Always share about Story Mosaics. And maybe there's one in particular, a Story Mosaics that's touched your life. Share that with another individual and let them know Story Mosaics, and how it takes everybody's story and lets them tell it. And that reminds me of something. I have one person. In fact, the next 2 weeks are going to be covered by two very capable people who are going to share their stories. First, I don't want you to mix next week as Justin shares his personal story, not a testimony, but another page torn out of his life, and a story that I think will be absolutely compelling for you. And I guarantee that his story parallels either your story or someone in your circle that will identify with his story. So make sure you join us next Tuesday as we listen to Justin's story, and then for the next few weeks as others share their stories. But here's how I got Justin's story. A friend of mine from over 60 years wrote me and said, Keith, you've got to have Justin tell his story. That's how I get it. And she wrote to me on Facebook, but some of you also need to know the way of getting in touch with me is this: story.mosaics. Make sure you have that S on there. story.mosaics1@gmail.com. Send me a note. Let me know you're listening. Let me know how the topics of these stories have touched your life. And then here's what I believe is that you have a story that you need to tell. And in fact, it's so important for you to tell. Join us next week on Story Mosaics.